Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to Nesp Reacts, where today we got ourselves an album from an act named Deus, exenterationis, titled the first and only Stevencore album. And if we switch over to here, we have what is quite a unique occurrence here. This is a 7-minute 32 album. There are 7 tracks, most of them under a minute. We're going to listen through it from start till finish and we're going to hear what we think. You know, at the end, I'm also going to be ranking these tracks like a tier list of the songs I liked from top to bottom, as well as an overall album ranking based on various musical criteria. But for now, let's go starting with intro. I mean, it's horrific. You can hear some elements within it, but it's very difficult to do so. I assume that was intro. That was a surreal experience, because in each of these little sort of mini sections I'm going to be providing an overall song analysis of everything from lyrics and vocals all the way through to studio production, as well as an overall analysis at the end, as well as the ranking and tier list, etc. But this first track, titled Intro, what do we think it's about? I'm not sure. I mean, Stevencore, I assume, given the track names on here, it is about Steven. We're going to learn more about it as we go along. It sounds like Steven goes on hell of adventures, but I think this is more of an aesthetic album rather than something which is clearly trying to tell a story. Maybe it's the thoughts in their head. It's extreme noise. Like, you can hear vocals in there, but they're kind of visceral, screamy, kind of throaty, kind of like, it's hard to really ascertain what they're trying to communicate. Like, it's just kind of sounds like people howling out for the end. There's like some robotic sounds in there. It kind of twists and turns, and it's blood curdling in its intensity. It's extreme. It's very unnerving. I think if you're not, there'll be people that would listen to this and not really be sure what to make of it. I think that's putting it lightly. But I think if we kind of remove the lack of clarity in terms of what the track is about, aside from simply being an introduction to what the rest of the album, I suppose, is going to sound like, you have to look past the fact that at 50 seconds, it's extremely short. You know, there's absolutely no filler in there whatsoever. It's very short. It's very to the point. It's cutthroat. You just have that kind of fizz, that fuzz there, that intensity. And you can hear these blast beats underneath these drums that are just consistently going like pistons pumping away in the machine. And there's this kind of interesting kind of synth or kind of guitar sound there that's kind of choked and machine-like underneath it. It almost sounds discordant, like it's dancing in the madness. That bom, 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 bom. It's almost like it's modulating itself, I suppose. And as these kind of cries curdle over top and sort of like stumble over each other, you've got that kind of freneticism of that melody or harmony trying to sort of tie and loop everything together as it just continues forward relentlessly. And it's this kind of Ouroboros of the da 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 as things pummel away underneath with a mixture of 16th and 30 seconds. And I think that the more that you listen to it, the more you just kind of accept the reality that you're in. And that's why when it suddenly ends at 50 seconds, it's almost you've been like waterboarded. It just cuts. It's like that. There's absolutely nothing more to it than silence. And it's a surreal experience for sure. But I think those are the main elements there. You have the distortion, the grit, the fuzziness. You have that bom, bom, bom instrument underneath where it's kind of difficult to discern what it actually is. The drums pummel away with blast beats. And thematically, it's just twisted and decrepit. And it's like, it's not chromatic, I suppose. It sounds major, but it sounds a twisted kind of major where it's sort of like confusing itself. So I'm not sure what to make of it thematically. It's damn near chromatic. It's just incredibly aggressive. Studio production wise, it's not trying to be a clean, pristine sounding recording. It's trying to basically come for your throat. It's trying to kick your teeth in, and that's the kind of vibe they're going for here. Everything's kind of shrouded in this kind of haze there, and it's just kind of infinitely like feisty and fiery, and it's very loud and abrasive, but at the same time there's a weird kind of musicality to it that I've got to appreciate in a kind of weird sense. Maybe I've just done so many of these recordings at this point that I can kind of sort of like look through what's being presented at face value. But at the same time there, I mean, it's fascinating. I haven't heard music like this before. And if we're going for, again, the aesthetic or the vibe of it simply being very sort of like organic and sort of like garagecore and stuff like that, even though to be fair, it is Stevencore, I'm happy with it, honestly. They're going for a harshness and they achieve that in spades. It's not meant to sound nice. It's meant to it's meant to be incredibly in your face. But I don't know what we'll go next. We'll find out. Steven runs over innocent civilians. Great Foley. I'm gonna like start it again just because I feel like interrupting like a minute long track is kind of rude, but I just love how you've got the car engines coming in there and they just slam away. You just got, it's great. It's just clever. So that was Steven runs over innocent civilians. That's Steven. I mean, you've got, what is this track about? It's about Steven running over innocent civilians. You hear the car start up as that chug chug guitar goes. And I kind of was thinking for a moment, maybe this will be a more sort of like typical production style, even if it's kind of gruesome and kind of grimy. No, we go back into like the spit. Is it sped up, like double timed or something like that? Have we kind of made it almost sort of chiptune-ish by kind of doubling the speed that we're playing the parts, and that's why it sounds glitchy like that? I've just realized as well that I don't think we had vocals in the previous track. I think we definitely had vocals in this one. It's this kind of black metalish, kind of foul, twisted, writhing, massive like hiss and noise. But just the use of the car foley to tell a story, the screams, it's showing that we do have our production as being a deliberate thing, in part because of how we transfer from the chug chug guitars there, the power chords that we have there, the menace to those, to just the glitchy blast beats, the more of that kind of insanity there instrumentally. It does transfer neatly, even though it's very like it's just crazy stuff. Like clearly like it's brittle sounding with how things are pushed and stuff, but if you've gotten through the intro, you kind of know what you're having with the rest of it. I think just vocally with the style of music we're doing, even though I don't understand the words that we're screaming into the microphone, I nonetheless like the way that we're really committing to the bit. You know, we're not kind of half-assing this concept of trying to sort of do the kind of really kind of frigid, kind of glassy, kind of messy, like the filthy sounding like production and sort of like instrumental parts there. We're also having the vocals be just as wretched. It does sound like fearsome. And like that kind of visceral nature to the vocals, it clearly carries through to the instrumental parts. It's just the icing on the cake at this point. But just structurally, again, with the car at the start, then you have the storytelling in the middle, which is an extended vocal instrumental component, and then we have the car coming to an end at the, you know, like you can follow along with it structurally. The transfers are clean, and there's like a cadence and phrasing to the vocals that you can follow along to, and it's not too strange or discombobulated. Like, you know, it's not too alien. Granted, the da 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 da, it's kind of like quite a lot to deal with melodically. Like the notes just sound like they're kind of bouncing backwards and forwards, like you're having a fever dream or 1,000 of them and within one sort of take. But ultimately, you just get the feeling that if this is what Steven is going through, no wonder he's doing all this crazy stuff. It's just feral. It's just feral. So you kind of get the impression at this point, listening through it, that this is more a representation of what Steven has been going through, that Stevencore kind of thing. And as that kind of like fizz and distortion ends and you have that crash kind of letting us out there, what's really interesting about that is that it's almost like the crash sounds clean enough that it's like a complete kind of contrast to the kind of crazy zaniness that we had prior. So I do think that kind of double track timing, the tempo of some of those bits there, but ultimately thematically, you know, at the start with some of those sort of guitar elements there, those kind of chug chugs, it does sound minor oriented there, and there's a sense of danger there, especially as the screams come through. And I have to give a shout out to the use of Foley and the fact that they managed to get those coming through quite cleanly. I think that was solid. You can hear just vaguely as well the tom fills and stuff like that. It's incredibly quick on the drums. Like there's actually some really solid drum work in the background that I can hear, even if it's like deliberately kind of like miscellaneous in terms of the note choices and stuff like that. It's just how everything comes together within the sort of like ambience we're creating. It's just like, it's basically the direct representation of someone having the episode with moments of clarity or lucidity before the chaos ensues. So ultimately, similar comments to what I've had in terms of the production in the past. It was just nice again to have vocals in this one that were still quite distinct in the mix, despite the deliberate kind of like messification of a lot of the other instrumental components. And I do dig that the car sounds and stuff came through. It was good. We've got Steven does a mass shooting at number 147.
Steven, wake up, Steven. You have work yet to do. You shall bring them pain.
They have promised you. Bring them sorrow.
I mean, what do you say to this? It's painful, dude. Honestly, like, that was probably, like, that was actually quite a well-told story, if I'm honest, in a sense. You know, you hear that kind of spooky voice in their head, and as it slowly becomes more distorted, you then get into more insanity, more school shootings. Just the voice in their head doesn't tell them to stop, it tells them to continue. It's brutal, dude. And you've got that kind of weird kind of like synthy kind of lo-fi-ish kind of thing going on in the background as they discuss the fact that they've still got more to do. And it almost seems like an interlude or an intermission before they get there, like they're waking up from a dream where things were quiet for a moment. And that it just doesn't end. And as you know, before you clearly have the sound of the gun loading and stuff like that, and you have Steven getting ready to do these things. And on one hand, is it from a listener's perspective, there's so much that is done without words needing to be said, but just this is the first time I've had explicitly clear words come forward there. Deus exenterationis. They want you to hear these bits and to at least understand at this point that this is not going to end for Steven, that he's going to continue to be like this. And even though you get into more of the similar kind of squealy, kind of screechy vocal styles, that again makes sense for the genre and the style of music we're making. Even though we get into this later on, you feel like it was even spookier hearing that sort of those spoken parts at the start, simply because it's more that you understand what the context of each of the individual voicings is at this stage. It was also kind of weird having things be a bit more quieter there. We have extensions and some of those arpeggios and sort of synth layers that we have early on as well there that add a bit of nuance there, and it's kind of chill sounding and a real sort of surreal, twisted. When you have more sort of distorted vocals and they become very kind of like chipped up and kind of chopped there, it starts getting really kind of mutated sounding, and you can just tell things are going to go to custard after that. But until that point, there's like a moment of calm, and you have this kind of interesting, almost kind of like it's like video game machine guns from like the 90s or something like this, like the helicopters and how they shoot their guns and stuff like that. It's not deliberately trying to mirror bluntly what we're doing with like actual gunshots and school shootings and stuff like that, so far as they're trying to recreate their own version of it. You can hear the screams both from the main sort of like antagonist as well as the people who are getting shot and such, and it's brutal, dude. And as you start to get into some really kind of scuffed, kind of noisy kind of sounds that like go above the pitch of like the standard sort of machine gun fire, you really do realize that whenever Steven gets moving, there are some horrible things that occur. And the song doesn't let up from the point that you start coming in with those blast beats again. It just, you can hear this kind of wistful guitar riff underneath it, but things with the vocals and drums get louder and louder, and it just screeches until it grinds to a halt. Just how kind of fizzy and fuzzy it gets to the end there, it's just overwhelming there. It really doesn't feel like at this stage Steven can go back to how things used to be. Things cannot be fixed. And then it just kind of stops. Like the signal cuts there, and you're wondering what the hell happened. And in isolation, these tracks would be quite enough, but like as we go through this and as I slowly read the titles of the other tracks within this, two things come to mind. One is the kind of, this is very metal in the way where it's not like it's filthy and it's like unadulterated and it's unapologetic in its response. There are some well-played guitar and drum parts underneath all the distortion and kind of shrillness of the actual sound itself. But ultimately, we carry ourselves well. There is structure to this one as well, just as per the second. And you don't feel good after listening to it unless you're able to sort of get past how much the music's trying to bite your eardrums in, which given the context that we're discussing within the track makes total sense. So studio production wise, again, nice and loud, and we're deliberately adjusting the intensity of the instrumental components to suit what's going on vocally there. So again, clearly all of this is deliberate. They're cognizant of what they need to accomplish the aesthetic they want. It's totally fine. We have Steven commits arson. And the accordions and synths are just demonic. I mean, that's a hell of a track to listen to at 11 o'clock at night when I'm recording this, dude. Like, I'm not like ancient by any means, but that's it's quite a lot. That was Steven Commits Arson. What do we, they're fairly straightforward, aren't they, these titles? I kind of interpret the opening sounds that are a bit quieter as being the lighter fluid sort of being poured on things. which again is just great sound design on behalf of Deus exenterationis. But then you've just got just caustic, like which I think they're probably using a keyboard for that, right? They're using like a keyboard or keys there to kind of go blah 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 blah, kind of like that with the keys there, and it's random, atypical, and it's sort of like way that it approaches things, and it's just oof, it's just heavy, but in an unconventional way that I'm not used to. Like often you get the chug guitars, or you get like heavy basses here. It's just that constant fuzz and fizz, that noise synth that's just kind of just biting at you, and it's just the temerity to have that dun for like a minute there, simply because you're acutely aware at this point of the tolerance of the people listening to this this album in the first place, is impressive. Like sincerely, I have to admit that I'm impressed by the fact that we feel comfortable and competent enough to like be able to sort of put forward something like this with what I assume is like there's not blast beats underneath, is it? It's more of a slower groove on the drums, but because of the hiss, it kind of hides maybe how the drums are a bit less kind of like sort of like ferocious in this one, unless of course we've just got incredibly fast 30 seconds underneath, I'm not sure. But just the way that the poured out things are almost like a sort of a noise synth as well there, the little pouring at the gasoline cans and stuff like that, it kind of squiggles and squeals and squishes around there, and it's visceral. And you hear occasional crashes to sort of change things up, but there's no relief until the end. You do hear Steven, this kind of shrill Steven, occasionally, almost like you're lost in the act, and it's that voice kind of screaming at you as you commit the arson. They didn't need to say more than that in this one. Again, you can kind of get the story you need to from what's being presented without them over-articulating it. It's that minimalism which I think keeps things both clear and mysterious at the same time. But structurally, you know, you had the light thing, and then you had the fire, and then that's it. Then things came to a close. Again, very short, very sweet, not overstaying its welcome, despite however you may feel about the subject matter or the music itself. And in studio recording, mixing, and mastering, similar comments to what I've had prior. It really is a case of simply going, okay, it's meant to sound kind of like harsh sounding, so they nailed that there. You can hear the kind of chromatics underneath, underneath there in a way that you can tell they actually play their instruments, which is cool. And then like they close neatly. There's dynamic range to it, you know, nice and loud pumping, but like it's all a fever dream. It's all a mist. It's all an ether, right? It's been a surreal experience listening through this. I haven't heard anything quite like this before. But we've got Steven Eats a Baby, track number 5. It's just writhing. We're just shredding on that keyboard in the background, aren't we? And that was Steven Eats a Baby. You could hear the babies crying, and then you could hear a chomp sound, and you could hear it crying a bit more. And they told the story they needed to very little. I couldn't really tell what the vocals at the end were, but just having the sound of the baby crying was all you needed to really sort of figure things out. But it's just so menacing immediately with like the squelchiness of those synths going backwards and forwards in the stereo field. They're so scuffed, but they're so like pervasive at the same time. And then again, you have the crying sound with the heavily distorted, kind of like bit crushed, kind of like baby vocals there, which stylistically gives it a very sort of surreal feel. But then the same thing happened with the chomping sound there, and you can hear the sound of the squelching, and it's just, It's brutal, dude. But as you get more of the squealing and more of the noise and hiss and stuff like that, you have those vocals underneath kind of chanting something, and it's like you're listening to a horror film in real time. And you've got the shredding on the keys as well there, and they can clearly play the keys actually quite well. It's just meant to sound random. It's meant to sound tense and uncomfortable there. And it's interesting to have that as a sub layer. Often when you have solo sections, you want them in the front, but you have to search through the hiss in order to do that. This has legitimately been a very unique, interesting album to listen to for many different reasons. I mean, the production is going to get an 8 out of 10 in terms of a score, despite what you might think, simply because I like the aesthetic. I like the style that we're trying to do here. And I don't know if we have drums at this point. It's just very sort of surreal sounding. I'm not sure how to interpret it. Things might just be so crushed that things are difficult to discern anymore. Potentially, it's more about the rhythm of the keys kind of assigning a sense of feel and pace to us. We're just literally witnessing it all, you know, from afar through our headphones. It is an album that is difficult to listen to despite how short it is. I don't think you could have gotten away with these being 3 to 4 minute tracks. It just would have been a little bit too much for some people, I think. Just a little bit too much kind of that kind of high end, especially from EQing perspective there. It's kind of, it's got some resonant frequencies in that front, but again, it's deliberate. And that kind of synth at the end, which just kind of go, and it kind of crashes out there. It's that part, it's just a machine breaking down. You don't know how this is going to end for Steven, but you know it's not going to end well. I just want to give a shout out before we finish though, of having the different kind of heavily sort of like heavily scuffed bass line at the start, kind of going backwards, going between like fifths or octaves there, and maybe using an octapedal or something like that. But then to go into the keys as like another sort of aesthetic when we get into the point where we're kind of eating the baby. I think it was just kind of cool to have different sort of like musical moods for those bits. So I think that was good. Kind of chapterizing it a little bit. We have Steven Fights the Cops, track number 6. Are they MIDI guitars? Are they MIDI guitars or are they like MIDI synths or something like that? Where are the police sirens gone? No, I think there was actually some guitar playing there, but it was just oscillating and kind of like cutting itself that it was just difficult to really discern what was going on there. It was interesting, because that was Steven Fights the Cops. You immediately get the impression with Steven versus the cops that is exactly what's happened after Steven has done all these things, which from like a story perspective makes sense in a certain way, I suppose. You know, you can only do so much illegal stuff before, you know, maybe there are consequences for it. And the use of you kind of hear like the cops talking over the radios, you can hear the sound of the sirens for a lot of it until the end where like either we win or you kind of black out, I suppose. You know, you hear this kind of hiss and fuzz that comes in occasionally in amongst the sirens, which are less modulated. Oh no, there's a little bit of kind of distortion and gain. There's distortion on everything with this track. Well, most stuff anyways. When we have the tremolo pit guitars, the kind of fizz comes in full force and it surrounds you. And I think that's almost trying to distract you from the fact that the sirens go away. And you do have these screamed vocals come in eventually to kind of add more context, as well as some like sort of like lower pitch vocals around like the early part there where we're speaking in a similar way to maybe track 2 or something like that. But I couldn't figure out those words there. There's even like this kind of sung part around like the last little bit of the track there where it almost sounds angelic in a really kind of messed up sense. It's kind of surreal how we're going for a cleaner tone after everything that we'd gone through. Like almost like we were kind of trying to be a bit more gentle or something like that after all the stuff we'd done. Like I'm not sure why the guitar is kind of like squealing away like that. I'm not sure why it's going backwards and forwards. Is it like the voices in our head? Is it the kind of the different opposing forces going between each other? And you can hear screams of people getting shot and sort of like noises of artillery and stuff like that, I suppose, in that part. And it's you can put 2 and 2 together. But it just, you feel bad for Steven in a sense, despite everything that he's done, because the voices just never left him alone. But it's getting more and more avant-garde as we go through. I don't even know how to kind of compare it. I could make sense of the first 2 tracks, but like this one this one, I like the Foley, but it's just, I do kind of wonder if we're using MIDI guitars though, just because of the way they kind of tremolo pick, that kind of stuff there, and how they kind of glitch when there's more than one note in like tune with each other, or like different strings together. I mean, either way, it's cool though. It's nice to maybe take a break from the keys in this one to have a different element, but it just kind of leaves you in a position where we're at the outro now, and we're genuinely not sure what else Steven can do at this point. But what are our options?
What were your motives?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know? I think we're done here.
Steven, you have failed me.
I'm sorry.
And that was the outro. I think at the end, what happened is that Steven got caught by the cops, was put in a position where they basically were left to their own devices. You know, what were you thinking? I think we're done here. And once they were left alone, the voice came back, spoke to Steven. Steven said, I'm sorry, and then he shot himself. And then you just have the kind of visceral understanding that that's the end of it now. That the demons have basically got to Steven in the end. The text-to-speech with the different voices was a nice touch, kind of like the AI voices and stuff like that. It gave it a really sort of like existential feeling to it. It made it more spooky, I think. The kind of like the demon's voice was like whispered. It's a different sort of like approach anyways to the sort of main parts. It kind of made it more human, I suppose, in a sense. Like the AI failed and it's not sure what to do with itself. Just the use of the Foley of the doors slamming, opening and closing and stuff like that is incredible. Just that bass response in there. Clearly we can produce music quite well. It's deliberately like this. We are making a really interesting environment for the music to preside in, and the use of silence when so much of this music has been loud makes it stand out more. The moment the gunshot occurs, it's just vicious and it's just kind of awful, and it's everything that we've had there, the glitchiness, the fast arpeggios and the keys, the synths, etc. It's just that perverse, like overbearing, just kind of like chaos that has been ever present throughout this album, and it's exactly what you would expect at that point. It's the end of the horror film. You got to go back to your life now. Structurally captivating. I did like how that conversation was had at the start. In terms of it being a quote-unquote outro, I think it nails it. And again, just fantastic use of dynamic range to have that kind of louder instrumental part near the end with like chaotic kind of chromatic notes there, not trying to find itself. It's just simply there to kind of, again, like make you uncomfortable and express the futility of the situation. I feel there's only so much I can say without saying more than I already have about things that have already been mentioned throughout these sort of like mini conclusions, but ultimately yeah, it's just a very unique album, and it's not going to be for everyone, but we're going to talk about it more in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion of my review of this album from an act named Deus, exenterationis, the album titled the first and only Stevencore album. In this section, we're going to be providing an overall album analysis of everything from lyrics and vocals all the way through to production, as well as any applicable constructive critique, and then finally my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But before you go into that, a couple of things. One, just to get it out of the way, I have put my preferred tracks in order like this. I actually think I liked the outro the best, primarily because of just how well it kind of finalized things. I like the intro, secondly, because I thought that it was just nice to sort of set that pace initially and set a precedent for just how the album was going to be. I think Steven runs over innocent civilians was great with the use of Foley and stuff like that. Steven does a mass shooting with the use of gunshots was fine after that at that point. Steven fights the cops, I think, simply because, I just don't feel it kind of hit as hard as the other tracks at that point, simply because I was used to the intensity of the rest of the album at that stage. Steven commits arson because it was more of the same as well, just a little bit less sort of sound design, I suppose, in the cops part. And Steven Eats a Baby, whilst it was really fantastic in terms of its sound design, it just, if I talk about whether or not it made me feel good or made me feel a certain way, I don't know. There was just something about it which just hit me differently. I suppose you take it as a compliment that that's my least favorite one, because you're not trying to make tracks that people necessarily are super stoked about after they listen to them. That's my tier list anyways. I also gave this album an overall score of 7.7 out of 10, which I feel is a solid score, and maybe not one that people have predicted, primarily because I can be kind of pedantic about my scoring, but there are specific reasons that I'm going to talk about in a moment for why I've given this score and a score. But first of all, what do we think this album is about? First and foremost, I think this is effectively about Steven, having an existential crisis, having severe mental health issues, and just the voices in his head convincing him to do a whole lot of really horrific shit. And at the end, effectively, he kills himself. And that may seem like a really horrific thing to write an album about, but I actually don't agree with that. I think that it's an experience that people go through. They have mental health issues, and some people go to really dark places with their own heads. Our brains can be our own worst enemies. So in a way, I do appreciate albums like this existing because of the way that they kind of sort of encourage people to be open to different lives people live. I'm not saying that people should be doing what Steven's doing, and I'm not saying that I don't promote justifications for it. It's just simply that, in this day and age where a lot of subject matter within albums is reasonably safe, even in the kind of heavier side of things, having something that kind of really catches you by surprise is a welcome concept. And I think vocally you have a mixture of different sort of spoken parts, like the voice in Steven's head, Steven, himself apologizing at the end, the cops sort of asking him things. You have the kind of conversations through, but they're relatively minimalist, and you have the screaming visceral voice in their head, the kind of blackmailish kind of stuff with solid technique, but that is indiscernible. You really cannot work out what they're trying to communicate. I think that's part of the process. You can hear the screams of people running away from Steven as they kind of try to sort of save themselves, whether it's within, the car or whether it's at the school and stuff like that. And you can hear the cops as well as they fight each other. And it's just, it's a heavy album. It does kind of pull at your strings a little bit. Clearly, we understand the intent, and we're deliberate in our design decisions and our vocal parts. And even if we don't get most of the words through clearly, you don't need to understand what the album is. It's designed well enough, especially with the use of the car foley, the guns, etc., the police sirens, etc., even the spraying of the gasoline on the kerosene on things. It's designed well enough to elicit a mood and sort of tell the story without being too blunt or holding your hand. Structurally, at 50 seconds per track to up to a minute and a half, I suppose, this album at 7 minutes is wonderfully short, but that should not be underestimated. There is an incredible amount of stuff going on within these 7 tracks, despite that short length of time. And after listening to it, I have to admit, I feel like it's been a hell of a ride, despite how short it is, considering there are some songs I've reviewed which are twice as long as this within one track. And I have to admit that, they were short and exactly what we needed. You know, there was some songs where it was one thing and then another, like a little intro, like with the voice and then the car, or like, you know, like the guns clicking and stuff like that, and there's a bit of foliage trying to set the mood. Often you come back to this kind of raucous instrumental passage where you have these blast beats, or you have these kind of chaotic shreddy key patterns going through arpeggios, modulating kind of majors or kind of tremolo picking certain notes on the guitars there, blast beating, heavy crashes, occasionally a bit slower, but still there's this lasting hiss there, and this kind of screech, that kind of brittle kind of like fizz and noise that comes through a lot of the time, which I think is the kind of the brain fog maybe, or something like that, or just the haze that the person is in as they do these things, that kind of chaos and craziness. When you combine those things, and you also remember we're not deliberately trying to make a really clean sounding sort of like recording, we're trying to create this atmosphere that Steven is in. It's heavy for far different reasons than a lot of the time that we listen to sort of like metal and stuff like that. There are very occasional chug power chords with you know, like palm mutes and like Phrygians and stuff like that, looking to the flat seconds like at the start of Steven Runs Over Innocent Civilians. But what we have here most of the part is just force. It's just forceful music, and it's uncomfortable, and it's not trying to be well behaved in terms of key signatures or anything like that. You have these ideas which are just frenetic and decrepit, and they present themselves in different ways where it doesn't become overplayed, partially because of how short the tracks are, but also because there are some points, such as in the outro, where there is just so little until the gunshot, and then you're reminded of the horror and depravity of it again before things finish and you're done. And you feel like you've lived a horror film in 7.5 minutes. And, you know, like the fundamentals of like the tremolo pick guitars or the palm muted parts there, individually they play quite well. And you can tell they can kind of play even if they're not trying to play cleanly in a way that makes a lot of sense sort of like structurally. Like at the start of Steven Does a Mass Shooting, there was, if I'm not mistaken, there were some really sweet sounding synth patterns there that were more sort of like easy to understand and easy to follow along to. And it was quieter as well and more gentle there, almost like you're waking up from a dream to go into a more kind of horizon. And especially when you include the silence within the outro section there, a lot of the melody actually comes from those Foley elements. A lot of the power of the track comes from those quieter points, those pauses, etc. The use of that blank space there before we kind of come in. But it's weirdly leveled at the same time in a way where we're not trying to sort of like force the point too much. And so ultimately, I know I've said a lot about this album. I know I have. I know this is probably a far longer review than people would have expected for this. I just wanted to make sure I did it properly, especially with 7 tracks. You have an album here that is its own learned experience, and you need to listen through it yourself to really understand and gather all the nuances. I think I'd have a different experience reviewing it, listening through it, if I wasn't reviewing it. I think that this track is meant to be listened through in one sitting as opposed to being done part by part like I have, so I'd recommend doing that if you haven't been able to do that already. But this is more about the story that they're trying to tell as opposed to creating a really sort of positive, fulfilling musical experience. The studio recording, mixing, mastering, the production side of things is intense and sort of extremely varied. But what I will say is, for the most part, I think the production was done quite well. The recording in parts was deliberately stylized and produced to have that kind of mucked up, synthesized, distorted, kind of gruesome sound across any of the vocals, the guitars, the drums, etc., the bass, synth pads, sirens, other parts, the text-to-speech stuff. It was all designed to be that way by the musicians involved within this. There were no accidents. There's fantastic dynamic range. If there are resonant frequencies, they're clearly deliberate. The music surrounds you in the headphones, and it just cuts and comes in. And there's production-based dynamic range. Things aren't the same loudness all the time. Clearly they're not. When they come in, you certainly know it. And it's loud, but not too loud at the same time. Bus compression limiting is handled. No applicable constructive critique. From a general listener's perspective, from a final general listener's perspective, I think this may indeed be the first and only Stevencore album. I don't know how you could top this, and I'm not being facetious or disingenuous. I think that they've clearly accomplished what they wanted to do here. I feel like this combination of elements they've discussed is enough, and I wish them all the best of luck in future. It's just not going to be an album for everyone. but I nonetheless appreciate that it exists. And in a weird way, I'm thankful in part for listening to it because it's definitely expanded my horizons. But thank you very much for watching my review of this album from an act named Deus, exenterationis, titled The First and Only Stevencore album. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via the various social medias and YouTube page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next SP Reacts. Spiderhands out.